When we study the past, we usually divide human achievement into neat, isolated categories. We look at a timeline for scientific discovery, another for political governance, and separate tracks for art, religion, and literature. But these divisions conceal the actual mechanics of civilizational development. When you remove the artificial boundaries, you see that these disciplines do not operate independently. They continuously interact, oppose, and reorganize one another into a massive, interconnected network. In continuity theory, these separate fields are coupled state variables of a single evolving collective system. We call this overarching system a civilization's cumulative consciousness. It is the historically accumulated and presently active organization of a society's knowledge, symbols, institutions, and memory. To understand how human societies actually develop, we have to map this architecture. We need a mathematical framework that models exactly how societies accumulate, distribute, and regenerate complex organizational knowledge. Making sense of history requires abandoning the standard timelines of isolated achievements. We have to map the nonlinear, collective mind of a society. We start by mapping this consciousness across 10 distinct cognitive currents: religion, philosophy, literature, art, science, technology, governance, communication, education, and historical memory. These categories are analytically distinct on paper. In historical reality, they are completely inseparable. You can see this overlap in physical reality. A single architectural space dictates social interaction and institutional organization. A monument like this simultaneously projects political authority, organizes spatial memory through its design, and applies complex structural engineering, governance, art, and science, occupying the exact same space. Any accurate measurement of a civilization must account for this multidimensional overlap. This gives us the baseline for our mathematical equation. The simplest formulation for measuring civilizational capacity is to sum the normalized conditions of the 10 individual cognitive currents. This base equation is incomplete. A civilization with disconnected fields could receive an artificially high score. To fix this, we introduce gamma, which measures the productive coupling among the different currents. Civilizational development is driven by nonlinear feedback loops. An increase in mass education directly expands a population's literacy. That literacy drives literary production, which in turn accelerates the communication and circulation of texts. Those circulated texts feed conceptual and philosophical development. Philosophy reorganizes the physical explanations of science, and that science drives material transformation in technology. These connections must be productive. Coupling can be destructive. If political power exerts absolute control over education, it suppresses scientific inquiry and breaks the loop. The true strength of a civilization does not lie in the isolated height of its individual achievements. It lies in the density and productivity of its internal network. This model also explains the paradox of historical collapse. During events like the Mongol invasions of Iran, severe institutional and demographic disruption causes the visible structures of a society to crash to near zero. The political state was eradicated. Yet the civilization did not permanently disappear from history. The scholar Edward Granville Brown demonstrated how this works. His analysis of Persian literature showed that poetry acted as a durable container for national consciousness and historical identity when political institutions failed. To map this mathematically, we separate cumulative consciousness into two layers: the visible, active institutions, and the latent, stored consciousness. Latent consciousness consists of residual language, surviving manuscripts, oral memories, and deep-seated cultural symbols that persist across the surviving population. The state collapses, but the stored information survives. When the recovery phase begins, the civilization does not reconstruct itself from nothing. It reactivates those latent, stored structures, bringing them back into active use. Political death is not civilizational death. The latent envelope of cultural memory ensures the system maintains a long-term upward trajectory. But surviving in isolation is insufficient. Civilizations also rely on exchanged consciousness, the capacity to receive, process, and translate external knowledge. Historical translation is never mere copying. When a concept moves from one cultural system into another, it undergoes an organizational transformation, entering an entirely new network of meaning. Finally, we apply the distribution multiplier. This measures how widely these cognitive resources are shared across the whole society. A society can produce brilliant philosophy and art, but if it restricts access to a tiny elite, its cumulative consciousness remains severely limited. The expansion of mass education and institutionalized public resources in modern periods radically increases this distribution variable. A robust civilization requires deep stored memory, high network integration, active external exchange, and mass societal participation. This is a chart showing hypothetical comparative curves of cumulative consciousness across distinct regional civilizations. By projecting our completed equation onto a timeline, we can see how theoretical math translates into historical reality. Because civilizations integrate their networks differently, they yield entirely different structural trajectories. There is no single universal developmental schedule. Mesopotamia displays an early high trajectory. This is driven by very early concentrations of writing, administration, and astronomy, even though severe institutional ruptures create deep valleys later on. Contrast this with the oscillatory envelope of Iran. You see repeated cycles of fragmentation followed by massive reintegration and synthesis. Despite the deep dips of political collapse, the long-term envelope continues its upward path. Then we look at the late accelerating typology of Western Europe, using France as the example. It maintains a low early phase before transitioning into a dramatic, steep upward acceleration in the modern era. This late acceleration reflects a specific historical phase shift. It is the moment when science, industry, mass education, and media became tightly, mutually coupled. Comparing these curves demonstrates that civilizational progress takes multiple valid forms. It ranges from continuous, steady layering to rapid, oscillatory regeneration. These dynamic models are analytical tools. They are not national rankings of intelligence, moral superiority, or human worth. They expose the crucial difference between merely possessing a vast stored historical heritage and actively integrating that knowledge in the present day. The continuity theory framework reveals that true progress is not a measure of raw data accumulation. It is a measure of adaptive network integration. A civilization's power is measured by the historically changing capacity of its people to preserve, connect, and creatively transform their shared human experience.